I look like that most of the time.
Okay. Okay, what's your name?
My name is Bill Amundsen.
Right. What was your address during the war?
Well, we had two houses, 322 Talcott Place, which is the corner of Talcott Place and Vine, and then 8110 North Merrill, which was a block north of Oakton Street. And I think at that time it was considered Park Ridge, but it was county. But I did go to Maine. And when we moved to Merrill Street, then I had to buy a car so I could go to school. My first car was a 1930 Ford coupe, 5-window coupe. Cost me more money because everything was going wrong with it. But that's,
When you moved, how old were you when you moved to your second house?
I might have been 15, maybe 15. So that would be about 1942.
Tell us about your family life and while living in Park Ridge.
Well, I had one brother and my mother and my father, and then my grandfather lived with us as long as I can remember. My grandmother died just before we moved to Park Ridge from Chicago, which was she died in 1934, and we moved, 1935, we moved in 1936 to Park Ridge. Rented a house on Columbia Street. I think it was 215 Columbia Street for a year until my folks bought that first house on Talcott Place. My brother was 4.5 years younger than I. So I went to Roosevelt grade school, and then out to Lincoln Junior High. And I used to ride the bus out there or ride my bicycle, one or the other. If the weather was good, I rode my bicycle. And my father was an executive. He was export manager of Swift and Company, which was at that time the world's largest meatpacking company. And he and the mayor of Park Ridge and a couple other men bought a car together, and they would drive from Park Ridge to the stockyards 5 days a week. And that's how they got back and forth. And then during the war, I as I say, I can't find my gasoline ration stamps. What they were for a private car, they were A stamps, and I think each stamp was worth, I think, a gallon. I don't remember exactly. It's been a little while. And then my father and the other men had what they called C stamps, and they had quite a bit more gasoline because that's the only way they could get to work. And my father used to garage the cars, especially out on Merrill Street, and you open the garage door and you get a whiff of the stockyards. It was a very pungent odor. But we had a very nice life, a very good life. Fortunately, my father had a good job all through the Depression years, and those were Depression years. I think he had 10% cuts in salary, but he kept his family alive and his sister's family alive too for a number of years. Then when we moved up to Merrill Street, as I say, I bought this Model A. It was a perfectly good excuse to have a car. I paid $65 for it, and I used to drive it around town. One time I ran out of gas stamps, and there used to be a paint store on Main Street, Oscar E. Carlson Paint Store, and uh, I went in there and filled my gas tank in my Model A with benzene. It was sold as a cleaning agent and a paint thinner. And I drove my Model A around on a tank of benzene, and it ran very well. One of the fellows in school had a beautiful Accord four-door sedan, about a 1931 or 32, and he heard that, so he went and put benzene in his gas tank and burned the valves out of it, destroyed the engine. So the Model A was built. I think you could have run it on water if you'd had to. The screwdriver and a pair of pliers was all you needed to repair the thing. They were pretty nice cars. But when the war broke out, are you interested in that? We lived on Talcott Place, and I remember the house had the living room, and then on each side of the living room there was a kind of a sunroom, and they were all windows, and so we had a radio, and that was our only means of. Nobody ever heard of television. We had a radio in the sunroom, and I was listening to Gracie Fields, who was a British singer, and she was singing the greatest aspidistra in the world when they broke in to her song and announced that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. I found out a few years later what an aspidistra was. Do you have any idea what it is? It's a tree. I don't know where they grow, but it's a tree. And somebody wrote a song about it. So I worked for Northwest Awning Company in the summers, hanging awnings for a couple years. They had a Model A pickup truck that they had modified for their use, and they had a rack on it to put the ladders on it. And I hung a lot of awnings in Park Ridge and Des Plaines. We used to make, during the war, you couldn't have frames made. So what we used to do is go and buy black pipe, and I would have to make the frame. I'd cut the pipe, thread it, and put the corners on it, or the hinge piece on it. And that was the way they made the frames for the awnings during the war. Made a lot of those, threaded a lot of pipe. In those days, of course, radio was the only means of news, except if you went to the theater, they'd have these Pathé news, where they would show, before a movie, they would give you maybe 5 or 10 minutes of news of the war or something like that, that they had filmed and had distributed to all of the theaters. It's called Pathé News. And that was our only visual type of a way of learning what was going on in the war.
When you said your family was coming off of the Depression, but since your dad has a job, you guys were pretty well off for that time. Is there anything that did change, that benefited your family after coming off the Depression? Maybe the start of the war.
Did the war benefit the family?
Yeah, because when the Depression ended, usually people.
I mean, did it help my father's job? And no, because it was pretty much a job that was very necessary. Everybody has to eat. So the Swift and Company did very well during the Depression. They had, people had to buy meat to eat. And my dad, of course, being an export manager, had a very good salary. And then he was promoted to. Swift and Company had an international company they called International Packers, and my dad got the promotion to be the general traffic manager, and he shipped frozen meat all over the world. from South America, Australia, I think some from Ireland, to all points of the world. And then when he was 60 years old, they gave him a book to read, and the president of the company said, well, you're going to be in charge of all the insurance for the corporation too. So he was general traffic manager and corporate insurance representative for International Packers. So the war really didn't help his income in any way. It was pretty much standard for the business he was in.
You said that you heard about the Pearl Harbor attack on the radio. Before this, though, the war in Europe was still going on. Did you hear about that as much?
I'm sorry, what?
Before the Pearl Harbor attack, the war in Europe was still going on.
Oh, yes.
So did you hear about that in
Oh, yes.
some ways, too?
Oh, yes, yeah. A lot of Americans went to Canada to join the Royal Canadian Air Force, and they did a lot of contract flying, delivering planes and so forth to Europe. And then, of course, we had the war between Japan and China in Burma, and a lot of Americans were flying airplanes over there, and that preceded the World War. But Hitler was having quite a successful time until the U.S. got into the war with him, with Britain.
When the war started, did anyone in your family or relatives join the military?
No, I was too young. My brother was, of course, too young. My father was, let's see, my father was born 1897, so he was 48 when the war broke out. And they had started the draft, and everybody had to register for the draft, including my father. And he was concerned for quite a while that he might be called to go, into the armed forces in one of the branches. He'd been sitting at a desk all of his life, so he wasn't really in condition to, I think, go into the basic training that they would have needed. He would have had a difficult time. But he was never drafted, and then I was too young to draft, and I had to finish high school, and the war, the VJ Day ended in August. VE Day was in I think it was April of 1945. So everything transferred to the Pacific from there. So none of us ended. My brother joined the Army later on. He was in the Army Security Agency, but there was no war at that time. I don't remember when he went in, but then I joined the Navy Reserve, and I spent 2.5 years in the Navy Reserve. And then when Korea broke out, they called me to active duty, and I went up to Great Lakes, and I was up in Great Lakes for 18 days and ended up with a medical discharge. So I never did serve. I used to get terrible headaches, and the only thing that would help would be a Kappa Bromo seltzer and just sit on the sofa with my head back for 2 hours. And I found out later on that I was allergic to chocolate and dairy products. I'm terrible allergic to chocolate.
I'm sorry.
But not now. I've stayed away from it long enough, and I'm a chocoholic. I can eat all kinds of it. As a matter of information, your football field is out here on Algonquin Road. We used to skinny dip in there. You know what that is? That was a quarry. It was a sand quarry. And there must have been a little spring at the bottom of this thing, and on the way home from school, we'd go for a swim. And then on north of D Road, where Murphy Lake is, and there's a lake on the other side too that they dug, isn't there? Well, there was a little spring-fed creek that ran through there, and we used to go swimming in that too. So we did our swimming before we had any lakes over there. But a bunch of us would always do that on the way home from school, and it was fun. We talked about Miss Parolini, who was the English teacher, about the strictest teacher I think anybody could imagine. When she had a test for us, we had to take 5 newly sharpened or freshly sharpened pencils, because if we broke a point or we dropped the pencil on the floor, we couldn't do anything about it. We had to take another pencil because she figured that we'd have some way of getting an answer to the test, and that there was no way in the world that she was going to let that happen. She was strict, but you learned grammar, you learned English. And when I listen to television today and I hear the grammar that people are using, it just really bothers me, because I think they're not being taught the grammar that we were taught.
You said that on your way back from high school, you and your friends would go in swimming, and what other activities did you and your friends do after school?
Well, in the neighborhood, we'd play. You know, we dug forts in the lots around us. Now, where we lived in Talcott Place, you could go from Devon Avenue all the way down to a riding stable that was down just north of Montrose, without having to go around any houses except for a farmhouse. There were no houses over there. The whole east side of Vine Street didn't have a house on it. There were some on the west side of Vine Street. And we used to cut the fields out there and make baseball diamonds. We played baseball. In the evening after supper, we'd go out and play kick the can. And just you know, neighborhood playing. I developed a friend that lived up on the north side. One of my classmates, Ray Moss, who died in an automobile accident in 1969. And I used to ride up there on my bicycle from Vine Street, and you know, whatever we did, we'd play. I don't even remember what we did, but I'd go up there and let's see. Most of the time it was just play, baseball, and I used to do a lot of work around the house. I'd keep the grass cut and wash the cars for my folks and do things like that. Help my mother around the house at times.
And this was during the war too, also, like hanging out with friends and cleaning around. Did the atmosphere of the war, atmosphere of your house or high school change when the war started or was going on?
No, the only thing was that my dad, they came up with block captains. You heard about that? The U.S. was very afraid that the Nazis would attack the U.S. And every neighborhood would appoint a block captain. We used to call him Blockhead. My dad was a block captain. They gave him a flashlight and a hard hat. And every once in a while, no specific interval, or they would have a blackout. Everybody would have to turn their lights out, all their outside lights, all the, darken the windows. And then my dad would have to go out with in his helmet, his hard hat, and the flashlight, and look around to see that everybody had darkened their homes. That's in case they would be flying over to bomb us. But of course, we were never attacked in this country. We haven't yet, thankfully.
At school, did you do any volunteer work or any kind of work at all at school?
No, I didn't do any volunteer work. There were a lot of kids that did the bond selling, that buy a few every once in a while. I had a part-time job, after school. Used to be I worked for the awning company, and then I worked for Eagle Food Mart, which is around the corner. Well, I don't know what's on the corner by the Pickwick Theater at Northwest Highway in Prospect. Used to be Henderson's drugstore, and I used to work there. I had a lot of jobs in town, and cigarettes were rationed. And I was working there at that time, and when cigarettes would come in, the people would hear about it, and they would line up at the cash register. And my turning around getting cigarettes and taking the money, I was getting dizzy. I was having to do it. It was just so fast. But cigarettes were 15 cents a pack. Today, I was in Chicago, $10 a pack now.
I've seen 12. So I've seen $12 a pack.
Have you really?
Yeah.
Yes. So, around the corner from that was an Eagle Food Mart, and the owners' names were Eagle Moose, and I used to drive their delivery truck for them. I'd deliver groceries, do some work around the house, around the store. And on Saturday morning, they had a man that used to make the donuts for them. And unfortunately, he was an alcoholic, and I'd have to go out. He lived in a little shack on Oakton Street. And I'd have to go out there and bang on the doors until I got him out of bed and get him in to make the donuts. They were the best donuts in this world, and I was dumb enough to never get his what do you call it? Just run out of my recipe. Thank you. But they were wonderful, and people would buy everything that he made. But he made them all by hand. And my first real job was with the Jewel in Edison Park. I think I was 15 years old then. Used to ride my bike down there. The Jewel had a store that was about the width of this room, a strip store, and that was when they were just starting out. Bagging groceries, filling the vegetable bins, and just general clerk work for the Jewel. But the war, we had the rationing of gasoline and foods, but we were never lacking. I mean, we ate well. We had Victory Gardens. There was a vacant lot next door to our house at that time, and we, along with a neighbor on the other side of the lot, had a Victory Garden. And we raised corn and all kinds of vegetables, We had chickens in the backyard in Park Ridge. That would, be mortified to hear that there were chickens in somebody's backyard. But we'd get eggs from the chickens, and they never hatched into chicks, so we didn't have any chicken from that, with just eggs. But we had a little coop in the backyard, a little fenced-in area, and had the chickens in there. Across the alley from us, it was all vacant, all along Talcott Road. And we get a lot of water back there, and it'd freeze, and we'd ice skate back there. There's a house there now.
So you said you work at the store. There was cigarette rationing, and you also talked about gas rationing. Was there any other kind of rationing that affected you or other people you knew?
Well, yeah, when you ran out of gas, you know, you couldn't drive anywhere. But there was down at Nagel and Northwest Highway, there was a gas station. You can get black market gas down there. And I visited them a few times. And you had to pay a premium, of course. But there always seemed to be a way to find gasoline for your car. And when I didn't have any more gas stamps, I tried the benzene at one time. But then I go down to a Nagel and get gas. I got pretty good gas mileage on that Model A. So,
going back to your high school experience, Maine High School had some assemblies for students that were killed in the war. Do you remember anything about that or experiences?
well, so I lost a couple friends. I don't remember their names anymore. That were killed during the war. One of my best friends was over in Europe. He was 3 years ahead of me in school. We developed our friendship after high school, actually several years after that. But he was in Europe. But some of our classmates were killed during the war, or some of my friends. I don't remember if there were any classmates that were killed during the war from our class. There might well have been.
Your class of 45?
45. The war was, I think, it was pretty well over. I don't. Some of the guys in the class might have joined before they finished high school, and probably maybe finished when they came back. I don't remember. I think a couple of them did.
The war bond drive to buy a C-54 built at Douglas Airport. The Douglas aircraft happened in 1944, 1945. Do you remember anything about that?
My father-in-law built airplanes at the Douglas plant. He worked there for a number of years. I don't remember the bond drives. Didn't even remember that our class got enough bonds to buy an airplane. But apparently we did. I heard about that at a meeting preliminary to the interviews here. A lot of things you forget. I have a good memory, but it's short. You know how it is.
You graduated almost at the same time at the end of the war. Do you remember? Can you tell us anything about your life after graduation?
Let's see. I worked for the awning company that summer, and I had not intended going to college. I didn't get a college prep diploma. I don't. Maybe I did. I don't remember. But our pastor came over on a Tuesday night and started promoting college. And on Friday, I was on my way to St. Olaf College in Minnesota. I had 2 days, you know. So I was not ready for anything at that time, and I had really no plans. I had signed up, I think I'd signed up in the draft, I'm not sure. No, I wasn't 18. So you had to be 18. So I was just kind of biding my time until I was 18 and working for the awning company. Just nothing special. I had a girlfriend. But, we'd go down to Lake Michigan and, down and have beach parties down there, and just have dates, go to the show. Or
How was dating in high school? Was it tell us about any experiences about those.
well, I ended up with a pretty steady girlfriend, and she was, I think, in the class behind me, and I have no idea where she is today. But when you have a steady girlfriend, there's never any problem getting a date. So you always, on Saturday night, you had somebody to go to the show with, and it was just good company. There was nothing really special. It was always fun, and then, of course, having a car made it a lot easier too. 'Cause I had no problem on where we could go or anything like that. We used to go down to Riverview, which was an amusement park in Chicago. And I remember we came home and I had, 4, 7, I had 8 kids on the front seat of that car with me. 4, 3, and 1. And the girl I had a date with had to do the shifting for me because I couldn't even reach the gear shift lever. And we passed a squad car in Chicago. Scared me to death. If you'd seen how many people I had on that front seat of that Model A. But that's what we used to do. We used to do, a lot of things with the church too. It was a Lutheran church in Edison Park there at Avondale and Oliphant, and they have a lot of activities. So spent a lot of time on that too. But dating was it was easy. It was nothing complicated. You just go to the show and maybe go out. And used to be a place on Toohey Avenue, just east of Prospect, on the north side, called the Spa, and it was an ice cream place. And we used to go in there and we get a sundae or a soda or something like that. Then they moved the Spa over onto Toohey Avenue near, it used to be Toohey Avenue Motors, out on the other side of the railroad on Toohey. But that's the way we used to date, movies and maybe ice cream after that, or some church activity. Yeah.
Can you tell me more about your involvement or experiences with the church?
Well, I belonged to what was called the Luther League, and then a few years later I sponsored it for several years until the church got an assistant minister, and then he and I worked it together, and we'd have parties and we'd go to different places. There'd be a Bible camp up in Wisconsin called Lutherdale. He's up near Lauderdale Lakes, And then a few years later, we started a young adults group, and that's all, single, unmarried, single naturally. Uh, People in the church or whoever wanted to join it. We played a game where they'd blindfold you, and then they'd have cotton balls on the floor, and you had to pick them up with a spatula and put them in the bowl. You're blindfolded. And I was looking at these pictures, and then looking at them, and I said, "Who's that bald guy down there? I don't remember him being at this party." And I looked again. I said, "My gosh, that's my sweater." I said, "That's me." I had no idea. I was 22 years old and I was bald. But that a lot of church work. I sang in choirs, a number of choirs. I love music. I can't read it. I just enjoy it, learn it, and then sing it. As long as I have the words written in front of me, I'm all right.
Oh, yeah, looking back on your experience as a teenager and just general during the war years, do you have any thing you want to tell today's generation of teenagers about your experiences back then?
I'm sorry, did what? I have hearing aids, and
That's okay. Looking back as your experience as a teenager, and general and during the war years, would you like to tell anybody of today's generation about your experience during that time?
well, we were always very concerned about the war and about the loss of life. That not only the Americans but any of the Allies. We were as familiar with what was going on as we could be, because I say, the only thing we had was the radio, and we'd listen to the news on the radio. Or if we went to a movie, they would have the Pathé News at the between the films. In those days, they'd have maybe two movies. When you'd go to the movies, you'd have two movies for the price of admission, and then in the middle they'd have Pathé News, and then they started going to one feature film, but they'd still have the news. And we were moderately concerned about being attacked in this, initially by the Axis, the Nazis. But then we were very concerned more on the West Coast from the Japanese. We didn't think the Japanese would be able to get inland this far from the West Coast, but we were always concerned about that. But we were kind of insulated from. We just went on with our lives. We went to school, and whatever normal activities you'd have, in a childhood. We were lucky. America was lucky. We didn't suffer the pangs of war that they did in Europe and in Russia. So, or even Italy is Europe. But we had good lives, and I remember the guys the guys in those days in the armed forces. They would get a cake from home or get cookies from home, and they always got their mail. And that never happened with the enemy, with the Axis. They were all intent on on delivering war goods to their people. So as a teenager, it was really not a type of a thing where you're constantly afraid. We were concerned, but it was a normal life.
That's good. So those are all good. Good interview on that. I like those follow-ups.
Andrew.
Yeah.
Oh, something.
I get confused. Yeah.
Something we used to do during the war, we would collect all of the grease. And they'd pay us, I don't know, 10 cents a pound for grease or something like that. And the cans that the food came in, we would flatten them out and we would donate them. I think we donated the grease too, and sometimes they'd pay for it. But the grease all went for ammunition. And of course, the metal from the cans went into armament.
Grease from like frying meat, or
I'm sorry?
What kind of grease?
Just any kind of cooking grease.
Oh, okay.
You know, bacon or if you're, well, anything that gives you grease, you know. We learned the cursor writing. I don't think there's cursor writing today, is there?
I learned.
Elementary
Are you
school?
learning cursor?
I already learned. I learned it.
Did
a
you?
while back.
Well, we used to have to do the circles. I guess, I think they're not teaching it today, are they?
In elementary
Yeah.
school, we did, but then they said we'd use it for the rest of our lives, and I've never used it since 5th grade. So.
Yes, but if I wrote something in cursor, would you be able
Yeah,
to read it?
I'd understand it.
Okay, see, but there are a lot of young folks today that had no idea. It would be like trying to read Chinese.
I'm not sure. My brother's in 5th grade right now. I'm not sure they did cursive, but we did. So.
Okay. Park Ridge School?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
Awesome.
so
Matt, you have to
That's
follow.
Park Ridge.
I went to Lincoln.
No.
Oh, did you
Yeah.
really? Oh, good, good.
I've got a few questions, Bill. Do you remember VE Day or VJ Day when it happened?
VE Day was not the great celebration. But VJ Day, my cousin was up here from Mississippi. And he and I went downtown in the Loop. And we were, I think, on State Street. And it was just shoulder to shoulder people. And some of the Navy guys were down there, and they were kissing everybody they could get their lips on, the girls. But it was just one big celebration. Everybody was so elated that it had ended. And the years after the war were the best years of our lives. From 1946. Maybe to 75. It was just really, really good. And then inflation really began to take hold, and different attitudes and everything. And music changed.
As far as can you tell us a little bit about your friends who lost in the war? So you said one was who was an older friend.
Yeah, I think he was a year ahead of us.
So he was a class of 44?
I think so.
Okay.
He had a nickname of Nobby, and I can't remember his name. Is out of my head now. But I remember he was killed in Europe, and we felt very badly. And I don't remember the names of the other people that were, that were lost.
So you joined. Now you graduated in 45. When did you join the Navy Reserves?
In 1946 or 1947.
Okay. After the war.
And we used to have our quote training exercises down at Navy Pier. And at that time it was still this basically a freight terminal for
Sure.
steamships. Or for shipping, export, import.
So you mentioned that occasionally we get black market gasoline. Did you do anything? Tell us about any time that you kind of got in trouble, or you would do any things that were kind of. We've heard stories about people siphoning gas, or just any troublesome. Statute of limitations is over. So
No, I
anything that you
never-
got in trouble with?
I never siphoned gas. I know some guys did.
Did they get in trouble for it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Heard a couple stories.
Did they get in trouble for it?
If they got caught, yeah, that's stealing,
Yeah.
you know. No, I never, if I couldn't buy the black market gas, I didn't have gas. You know, that one time, as I say, I went to benzene, but normally there was gas available, and you know, it's just for driving around town, driving out to school and back, which didn't take a whole lot of gasoline. So I never got into trouble with anything like that. And I don't know of anybody that did, actually. I know siphoning went on, but I don't know of anybody that did it.
So you didn't have any cousins or anybody else you knew went into the military?
Oh, just my brother.
Just your brother?
My other cousins were too young, were younger than me.
Yeah.
And he enlisted in the Army, and he went into, well, no, I don't know if he was drafted or if he enlisted. I think he enlisted to get into something that he wanted to. He got into the Army Security Agency. And he went to Framingham, Massachusetts, and went through some intense training. Ended up in Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines as a sergeant of the motor pool. With all of his training, he was in the motor pool. He was over there for 2 years and then came home.
So did your family buy any war bonds, or do you know anything about that?
I don't remember. I'm sure they did. I don't remember the quantities or anything. I know people tried to buy as many as they could. What my family bought, I don't remember. It's a long time ago.
Sure. Fiona, or?
I have a few questions, if you don't mind. Most of them are curiosity questions. You kept mentioning the shows on Saturday night. What is that?
The theaters, movie theaters.
Oh, okay. So, like, movies, were they, not, obviously not color, but, like, did they have sound yet, or no, or was there?
Well, they had
some-
sound, but the films were black and white.
Yeah.
We didn't have the color until, well, they were beginning to come in color.
Hmm? Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Another curiosity question. Did you guys have a lot of homework, especially, like, in high school? What was the homework load like?
Yeah, I wasn't great on homework. I'd get it done, but there was a fair amount, not the amount that you get today.
Yeah,
by
because, like,
any
nowadays
means.
we don't sleep, but...
Yeah, our homework was nothing to what you get.
Okay, lucky you. Okay, so, like, Park Ridge, was the layout about the same as it is now? Like, the roads were, like, if you listed, like, a few main roads, did they look the same as they do now? Like,
Yeah,
they
it's,
do?
yeah.
Like, obviously there were...
North of Oakton, there are some new streets up in there.
Mhm.
Oh, I remember one thing. You know where Michael John Terrace is?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's south of Oakton, and it's a pretty nice,
It's near the country club area, right?
well, yeah, it's east of that. It's east of Prospect, and where Merrill and Wisner and East Avenue and everything goes up against Oakton Street. Well, there used to be a farm in there, and there was a little creek that ran through there. And when I wanted to go and visit my buddy that lived on Elmore Street, I'd go through the farm and drive across the creek and drive on to Elmore. And I remember my brother used to go over and visit the people that owned that little farm, and in order for her to make bread, she'd shoo the chickens off the table. Yeah, but they managed to live.
On Oakton, there's an ice rink now. Like, if you pass by it. But yeah, that's not important.
An ice rink?
Yeah.
Really? Where?
It's like, if you go on D, like where D and Oakton intersect, if you turn right on Oakton, it's like right there. It's really close.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So I skate there. Well, I used to. Anyway, you mentioned that the Americans sent planes to China and Japan, and like, what did they, before the U.S. got into the war? Like, what did they do that for?
Well, the Americans were helping the Chinese in fighting the Japanese.
Yeah, but they weren't,
And-
before they got involved in the war, were they just, sending them?
Well, no, Americans went over there. They joined on their own. I mean, they were not sent by the government.
Oh, okay.
They were pilots that wanted to go over there, and they used to call it flying the hump over the mountains in Burma.
Mm-hmm.
And that was never sponsored by the U.S. They had American planes, but I think the Chinese bought the planes. But it was all. I'm trying to think. There's a John Wayne movie. What's the name of it? I can't think of it right now.
What was it about?
About the war between China and Japan, flying the hump. I have a copy of it at home that I taped. Can't think of the name of it. But a lot of Americans were over there in the early 40s. And I remember Chiang Kai-shek was the premier of China. He was a Christian. He and his wife, and they left China proper, and went to the island out of my head. Taiwan.
Yeah.
And he died in Taiwan, but the communists then took over, and after VJ Day, General Douglas MacArthur, who was the general of the armies, wanted to go on through. This was the Korean War. I'm sorry, but he wanted to go right on through North Korea, and just all the way on through China. And he had a big battle with Harry Truman, who was the president. Truman didn't want to do it, and he retired MacArthur. And I remember I was working for Armour and Company, and we all stood in the vice president's office and listened to MacArthur's farewell speech. But if we'd have gone through China, it would have been a whole different story over there. what we did for Japan after this war, we could have made them a territory of the U.S., but we didn't. And we helped them to get back on their feet, manufacturing, and of course, in those days, right after the war, everything was made in Japan, like everything now is made in China. But MacArthur helped Japan to get its country back in order, and they don't have an emperor that rules Japan like they had at that time. But you have to give MacArthur credit for helping the Japanese get back on their feet. Germany, they're very industrious people, and they worked very hard after the war, the West Germany, to get back on their feet, and they got their manufacturing back very quickly to a peaceful type of production. Yeah, but America helped them to some degree. And if it hadn't been for America, the Nazis would have won the war. Because the minute that we were attacked well, we got into the war. I remember I don't remember when we got into the war with Germany, but we instantly went onto a war footing, because we had the manufacturing in this country that we don't have now, and we went to building anything we needed within a couple of weeks, in some cases. And then when the Japanese struck, we were already on a war footing. But there was a lot of ignorance and a lot of very serious mistakes made before the attack on Pearl Harbor. I used to wonder about Roosevelt, whether he was involved with that at all. And I still wonder. But
How do you mean involved?
Whether or not
Hmm?
Roosevelt helped with the attack on Pearl Harbor. Remember we watched that video?
Oh yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president when
yeah.
we were in war. And he didn't make some very good decisions. And he had some people working for them that were I can't say not intelligent enough, but they just didn't believe that anything would be happening. They refused to believe the possibilities of being attacked. And they were warned, and still they disregarded.
Did your parents ever share their thoughts on whether or not the United States should engage in the war, considering what they experienced during World War I?
They never, I don't remember them ever discussing it. We knew that that the war was going on in Europe between England and that France had been taken over, and of course they were beaten back by the Russians. And I don't think the U.S. ever figured that we were going to end up in any kind of a war. They were concerned for the outcome, But then we began to get involved with Britain. We were helping Britain. If it hadn't been for America, I had a newspaper article, and I've lost track of that. But we had what we called a Lend-Lease program, and we supplied Russia with hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of war material, and they were supposed to pay us back, and they and Britain, and I think of all of the countries that we supplied with war material, very few ever paid us back. I think one was Norway, and I one or two more that repaid the U.S. for what we had sent over during the war for them, and I think if the Russians ever paid us back, we would have no problem with our economy.
Anybody have any other questions?
I do. Wait, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Just one thing about the C-54 plane they raised money for. Did you actually see that in person?
No, I never did. I don't know, was it ever on display? The airplane
When you guys they had that assembly where they bust you all to see the plane get dedicated.
I was never there.
There's a picture in the 1945 yearbook
Yeah.
that we
Oh.
saw.
I was not in that. I don't know why.
Might have been there.
I might have been out in left field somewhere.
Okay. You said your dad shipped meat basically all over the world, and it was frozen. So how did they do that back then? Was it by plane or by
No,
boat?
by ship.
Okay, but
By,
then
by ship.
would it stay fresh? When
Oh, it's all frozen.
Yeah.
It was
Oh,
all
okay.
frozen.
There's like container ships. and
Yeah,
stuff.
they have what they call reefer ships, refrigeration ships.
Okay.
And it was all frozen. But well, there was also canned goods that came, from Argentina particularly, but from Brazil. They would can beef.
Mhm.
They had a lot of lamb and mutton from Australia. And this country had refrigerated rail cars. It would be, like you make ice cream at home with salt and ice, blocks of ice. Well, that's the way they refrigerated the rail cars in those days.
Okay.
And it was quite a business making ice for these big blocks of ice. And that was until they got mechanical refrigeration. That was the way it was refrigerated,
Yeah.
frozen.
How did you make ice during the summer then?
Well, they had regular plants that made ice. As a matter of fact, there was one on Avondale Avenue, just east of of Edison Park Lutheran Church. There was a big ice making plant there, and during the war we didn't have mechanical refrigeration. We had ice boxes. You heard about them?
Yeah.
And we'd put a sign in the window: 25, 50, 75, 100. How much ice we needed, and the iceman and I that came around our part of Park Ridge on Columbia Street had a horse-drawn wagon, and he would chip the ice off to get figured, whatever size piece of ice we wanted. And while he's in delivering, we were out there picking up pieces of ice off of the bed of the wagon and eating the ice. Of course, it wasn't anything. It would melt if we hadn't done it. But
What did the numbers stand for?
Number
how many pounds of ice we wanted?
You could get 100 pounds of ice. Wow.
Yeah, if you had a really big ice box. It's a,
So that was
it's a big
big.
hunk of ice, but, you know, the ice went on the top, and all the refrigerated products would be on the bottom. And my mother would go to the store every couple of days to buy meat, because, you know, it was very difficult to keep meat in an ice box. And she'd buy her vegetables fresh, and they didn't have the canned stuff that we have today. You had to buy most everything fresh. And I remember we'd be snapping the beans off, you know, and all the vegetables would be raw from the store.
That was really good.
The first refrigerator my folks got was a Cold Spot Sears, and well, that was wonderful. It had an ice cube tray in it. We'd get ice cubes out of it, you know. It didn't have freezer compartments like they have today. And my parents kept that refrigerator. They moved out to Biltmore Estates, which is now North Barrington, and they had that refrigerator. They must have had that refrigerator for 25 years, and it was still working. So those were the days when you got quality products.
Do you remember where your mom shopped in Park Ridge?
I'm sorry?
Do you remember where your family shopped in Park Ridge?
Well, let's see. I remember there was a Cherry Food Mart, and that might have been, I think that was in Edison Park. It was a butcher. And, gosh, I don't know what, I can't remember what stores were in town. Remember, we used to buy 10 pounds of cottage cheese a week. I ate most of it. It was 10 cents a pound. This cottage cheese was kind of a leftover thing that they couldn't use, and they'd sell it for 10 cents a pound. But a lot of during the war, I ate a lot of cottage cheese. It's a good way to fill up, you know, not use stamps.
10 pounds though. Like, how big of a container of cottage cheese is that?
Oh, they were 5-pound containers.
Oh, okay.
About a couple
So-
a week.
Oh my gosh.
Well, thank you very much, Bill.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I hope
Very
I had
informative.
something that
Yeah.
Yeah.
would help you.